This is REL 105, Comparative Religion. In this segment, we're going to talk about religion and science. This is part one of a two-part series. Let's begin. Let's start with a question. Do science and religion ever meet? Some say not at all. Others say yes. You would be surprised. Many people believe that science provides evidence for an intelligent being behind the universe. Is this a legitimate concept? We'll attempt to answer that question in this segment. Let's restate the ground rules for our class. We're using the legal/courtroom approach. We allow proponents of a worldview or religion to state their point of view. We listen thoughtfully. In any case, you can disagree, but you must try to understand. So far, we've looked at a number of religions. Each religion has millions of followers, so we try to understand even if we disagree with any particular one. This is important on many levels. First, we are surrounded by people who disagree with us. They have a different way of looking at the world. So your neighbor, family member, somebody who comes into your office could have different beliefs. And so we've based our class on the idea that the world is a better place if we try to understand each other. And of course, there is the dangerous notion that if we listen to somebody else, we might believe that they're right. Millions of people believe in an intelligent creator. Many of those people believe that science supports the idea of an intelligent being behind the universe. So the same principle applies. Even if you disagree, you must try to understand. You are the ladies and gentlemen of the jury. You must decide for yourself. Let's look at how this question is portrayed in the public square. In March of 2015, National Geographic magazine featured an article called "The War on Science." The cover had a picture of what some people think happened during the moon landing. There are people who think it never happened. They think that some people put together a set, maybe somewhere in Hollywood, that looked like what they thought was the surface of the moon. They then had actors in costumes jump around using special effects. Why would some people believe such a thing? Once you read the article, the phrase "war on science" wasn't actually mentioned. Rather, the article asked a more general question. Why do otherwise intelligent people doubt science? One of the pictures included in the article was an old picture featuring a square and stationary Earth, incidentally a flat Earth. Now, there are people who believe in a flat Earth. Maybe those people believe the flat Earth is in the center of the universe. Add to this, some of those people would say that their views are based on faith. However, we have to ask the question, do all people of faith hate science? Do all people of faith doubt science? Does the fact that you have faith mean that you have to believe in a flat Earth? Is faith at war with science? Is it even fair to pose the question this way? In order to answer those questions, let's look at the implications of faith in a creator. Let's look at how these questions relate to life in the universe. Currently, there are two main views. First is expressed in Darwinian evolution. This belief says that all life is the product of random chance. Now, I know that the phrase random chance is repetitive, but I just want to use it to stress the point. People who hold this view believe that all life, as well as everything in the universe, is nothing more than the product of chance. The whole universe is nothing more than a series of random events. Here's an important vocabulary word. This is called a materialistic view of the universe. All that we need to be concerned about is the material of the universe. When this view is applied to life, proponents would say that all life is merely the product of random events. Changes in organisms are the product of adaptation to a random environment through natural selection. We'll talk more about that in a bit. If this view is true, it's very important to understand. Life, human or otherwise, has no ultimate purpose. In opposition to this is the belief in a creator and a creation. Proponents of this view would say that an intelligent being created life and everything else in the universe. Here is a statement from this group. The theory of intelligent design holds that certain features of the universe and of living things are best explained by an intelligent cause, not an undirected process such as natural selection. If you want to learn about this view in detail, you can visit the website intelligentdesign.org. If this view is true, then life, as well as the whole creation, has a purpose. Charles Robert Darwin presented his view to the world in the year 1859 when he published The Origin of Species. Let's look at Chapter 4, Natural Selection, or the Survival of the Fittest. Natural selection, its power compared with man's selection. What does that title mean? Well, Darwin suggests that there are two kinds of selection. The first is human. Anyone who works with animals or plants knows that you can breed those organisms. You can take an organism that has desirable features and breed it with another that matches those desirable features. Let's say that you're a farmer and you work primarily with sheep. Every year you shear the sheep to get their wool. Ideally, you want a sheep that has lots of wool. So you might pick out a male who has lots of wool and then a female who has lots of wool, and you would let them breed. If you did this, you might get children sheep who have more wool than the parents. You repeat this process until you get a breed of sheep that is known for lots of wool. Darwin then asks the question, can the principle of selection, which we have seen is so potent in the hands of man, apply under nature? He then discusses this idea of natural selection. We'll see in just a bit that Darwin held a materialistic view of the universe, and so nature was a series of random events. Let's see what this might look like. Instead of sheep being on a farm somewhere, imagine that they're all living out in the field by themselves. Because of genetic variety, they produce children sheep with all different levels of wool. Some have lots of wool, some have a little, some might have almost none. Let's then say that there is a really bad winter. Those sheep that have little or no wool perish. Those with lots of wool survive. Because they survive, they can breed and produce more sheep who share their genetic tendencies. Darwin describes this process by saying, this preservation of favorable individual differences and variations, and the destruction of those which are injurious, I have called natural selection, or the survival of the fittest. Understand that whenever a scientist publishes his work, he normally shares it with other scientists in smaller groups for review. Apparently, Darwin did this and was asked a question. In the same chapter that we previously read, he says, "It has been said that I speak of natural selection as an active power or deity. But who objects to an author speaking of the attraction of gravity as ruling the movements of the planets? Everyone knows what is meant and is implied by such metaphorical expressions, and they are almost necessary for brevity. So again, it is difficult to avoid personifying the word nature. But I mean by nature only the aggregate action and product of many natural laws, and by laws the sequence of events as ascertained by us." So again, Darwin's view of the universe is materialistic. It's simply a series of events. Certain events can be observed or ascertained by us, and they can be described as laws. However, there is no intelligence behind this process, only chance. In our example with sheep, the fact that one sheep has more wool than another isn't good or bad. Moral judgments don't come into play here. The only thing that matters is that through a series of random events, one organism has what it takes to survive a randomly changing environment. This had immediately recognizable theological implications. If the universe can be adequately explained through the existence of random events, then there is no creator, no God. As an irony, proponents here would say that science and religion do in fact meet here. Science destroys the need for religion. You can imagine that those who believe in a creator would find this troubling. Some have tried to solve the dilemma with various compromises. One such compromise is theistic evolution. People who suggest this would say, well, maybe God used evolution when he created. Sadly, this has a lot of problems. Critics would say that people who use this demonstrate that they don't really understand what evolution is. The phrase theistic evolution is said to be an oxymoron. An oxymoron is two opposite words that should cancel each other out. Comedian George Carlin used to like to talk about jumbo shrimp. Jumbo is a word we think of as big. Shrimp is a word we think of as small. So the phrase should cancel itself out. Evolutionary theory says that the universe and all life is the product of random events. So there can't be a creator. Let's say that I take a lump of clay and put it on a table. If I come back a while later and find that something fell on it and so it had changed its shape, then we could say that the clay had evolved into another shape. We could say that because random events had taken place. On the other hand, if an artist came and began to shape the clay into a sculpture, that wouldn't be random events. That would be an intelligent being acting on the clay. So the words theistic and evolution are really opposite ideas that cancel each other out. You can't have both in the same phrase. Now, there's a bigger problem here than definition. You see, if the creator used processes similar to the way nature currently works, then the creator must like them. You've all seen the documentaries. Out in a field somewhere in Africa is a field of gazelle. The gazelle are quietly and peacefully feeding on grass. However, in some bushes nearby is lurking a predator, say a leopard. The leopard jumps out and chases the gazelle. There are lots of gazelle, but eventually one of them winds up falling to the leopard. Which one? Evolution says that it's the one that is least adapted to its environment. That can be caused by age, illness, or some genetic defect. It can also be caused by plain old bad luck. One way or the other, some unlucky gazelle gets eaten. The other members of the herd survive, and so they can breed more animals like them. That's survival of the fittest. Comedian Woody Allen said this, "To me, nature is spiders and bugs and big fish eating little fish, and plants eating plants, and animals eating, well, it's like an enormous restaurant." So understand, if God used evolution, then God must like this. This is his preferred way of doing things and has been for billions of years. Many people become troubled when they hear evolution described in these terms. So here's a big question for evolution. Does evolution ever change its mind? And if so, why? Now you might say, that's a dumb question. We've just learned that evolution is not an entity. It's not a deity. It's just a way of describing random events in the universe. It doesn't have a mind to change. But many people seem to think that way. Let me give some examples. When we turn on the television or look at our favorite magazine, we often see advertisements for organizations like St. Jude's Hospital for Children. We're told that the hospital takes in children who are sick. They have cancer and other diseases that might be caused by genetic abnormalities. And we're told we should contribute money so that we can spend great deals of time and resources in healing these kids. But think for a minute. Is that what evolution teaches? Evolution says that organisms with weak genes should be eliminated. They're eaten by predators or they just die off. When these things happen, it's a good thing that improves the species. So, if this is what's been going on for billions of years, Shouldn't we just let that happen here? Or has evolution changed its mind? If we heal these kids, won't they just grow up into adults with bad genes? And then maybe they'll put those bad genes into the gene pool, and we'll just have to begin the process all over again. Now, most people are troubled when they hear talk like that. Why is that? Why is it that when we apply the concepts of evolution to sick children, we experience negative emotions? Let's look at another area. Let's consider the way that we treat the elderly. Basically, the older people get, the more they cost. Here's a quote from a report that was prepared by the National Institutes for Health. Per capita lifetime expenditure is $316,600, a third higher for females, $361,200, than males, and you can see the figure. 2/5 of this difference owes to women's longer life expectancy. Nearly 1/3 of lifetime expenditures is incurred during middle age, and nearly half during the senior years. For survivors to age 85, more than 1/3 of their lifetime expenditures will accrue in their remaining years. Now, let's look at this woman in the hospital bed. Is she putting any genes into the gene pool? Is she helping in any way, like watching other people's children or contributing to society? Yet we're spending more money on her than we do with younger people. How does that jive with evolution? Or did evolution change its mind? Again, for billions of years, the elderly were the first to fall when the predators strike. Maybe younger people should all go down to the local nursing home and simply take the residents and throw them out on the street, because they can. But again, why is it that when we hear evolution applied in this way, it makes us so uncomfortable? It gets worse. Somehow, the implications of evolution are very uncomfortable. With species in nature, evolution removes weak genetic lines. Why do we fight to save the sick, the imperfect, and the aged when nature, quote, tells us, unquote, to get rid of them? Here's where it gets even worse. If evolution is true, what does it say about variations within a species, such as human beings? Are some humans more evolved than others? And if so, should the more highly evolved hold preeminence over the lesser evolved? Let's look at two examples of this. In nature, let's say that there is one piece of food. There are two organisms who want the piece of food. Which one gets it? The stronger one. That's evolution. That's survival of the fittest. So now, let's say that there is a piece of property. A group of humans lives on that piece of property. Another group of human beings wants the property, and so they take the property from the other group. This happened when Europeans came to the North American continent. The indigenous Americans had property taken away from them by the Europeans. Today, thoughtful people say that that was a terrible thing. But if evolution is true, what was wrong with it? Isn't that what happens in nature? Let's look at another example. Millions of years ago, some primates were wandering around a jungle in Africa. Life was easy. It's warm all the time. There's fruit hanging off the trees. But a group wanders off. Life for them is a little bit tougher, so they have to work their brains more, and so their brains grow. They have to start making tools. They have to adapt to harsher and harsher environments. With each generation, their brains are getting better. They're smarter. As they migrate up into Europe, now the weather starts getting cold, so now the challenges are even greater and the brains must grow even more. At some point, you get, quote, advanced and sophisticated Europeans and, quote, primitive, unquote, Africans. Perhaps the Europeans should dominate the Africans and other races that are less highly evolved. That was the belief of a man named Adolf Hitler. He believed that the people of Northern Europe were the most highly evolved people on the planet. Therefore, they should dominate and rule all the others. Now, do you find these ideas troubling? The idea that we should not try to heal sick children, that we should simply leave them to die? or that we should throw the elderly into the streets, or that some groups of people should dominate the other groups of people because they're more highly evolved. I do. I find these ideas very troubling. Now, many of my students will try to explain this disconnect. They'll say, well, maybe. But you see, the question is not that we can find a resolution that makes us all feel better. If you support evolution and you are troubled by these ideas, you must explain why they are impossible. You must explain why no one could possibly start with evolution and end with these troubling notions. And you must explain using science, not your emotions. But now, let's ask the most important question of all. If evolution implies these things and we're all troubled by them, what if it's because none of us believe in evolution, really? What if we've all been taught that science teaches evolution and that if you challenge science, it can only be because you're stupid or insufficient in some way? But what if the problem isn't us? What if the teaching of evolution is wrong? Is science a god? Is science infallible? What if science has taken a wrong turn somewhere? Could it be that there are holes in evolutionary theory? Let's consider that question. As it turns out, there are some significant scientific challenges to evolution. One is the laws of thermodynamics. Evolution breaks these laws completely. Here's how this works. In nature, things on their own go from complex to simple, not the other way around. Let's take the example of a sugar cube in water. If I take sugar, which is complex molecules, and put it into water, the molecules begin to break apart. They will break apart until they are all evenly distributed randomly throughout the liquid. This is called reaching equilibrium. This is how science is supposed to work. If I create a laboratory experiment where something happens, that law is supposed to expand out into the world around us. So in science, as expressed in the laws of thermodynamics, things in nature go from complex to simple, not the other way around. Proponents of evolution say that this is exactly what happens in the universe. Things go from simple to complex all by themselves. An illustration of this is Darwin's tree of life. The idea is that random chemicals became a living cell. The cell then began to multiply and become different until you eventually, over 1 billion years, saw all of the kinds of life that we see here on our Earth. But understand, this completely breaks the laws of thermodynamics. In order for simple things to become complex, they must be acted upon by an outside influence. An easy way to illustrate this principle is Lego toys. Many of you have played with them as children. In the upper picture we have random Lego toys. In the bottom picture we have a beautiful little house. Question: what does it take to go from this randomness to organization and complexity? Another way to ask is, what is the most normal explanation for this to happen? The most normal explanation is that an intelligent being took the pieces and assembled them into something that has purpose and function. In fact, in this case, the Lego toys were designed by intelligent beings. They were designed to be put together. They were designed to stick together. They were designed to be taken by an intelligent being and shaped into other useful things. Or we could argue that molecules floating around the universe randomly bumped into each other and over a long period of time became the little house or other complex things. That is on some level possible, but it's not the most normal explanation. Why is this? Why does science assume an abnormal explanation rather than the most normal one? To answer that question, let's watch a video together. The video we're going to watch is The Case for a Creator with Lee Strobel. It's available from a company called Illustra Media, or you can watch their YouTube channel. We'll include segments of the video here for your convenience. Between each segment, we'll have study questions. Let's ask a question before we begin the video. Sometimes I see debates between a scientist and a person of faith. The person of faith is introduced in this way. This is Pastor Jimmy. Pastor Jimmy holds a certificate from the East Swamp Creek School of Bible and Truck Repair. At the other podium is Dr. Smith. He holds 3 PhDs from Harvard, Oxford, and the University of Berlin. Let's let Pastor Jimmy go first. Pastor Jimmy walks up to the podium and says, "God says it, I believe it, that does it." He pounds on the podium a few times and then walks away. Then Dr. Smith walks to the podium and he says, "Let me now explain the view from years of scientific evidence." Now, as you watch this video, I'd like you to ask the following question. Is this Pastor Jimmy, a person of religion with almost no scientific training, versus a sophisticated and intelligent person with loads of scientific training? Or are the speakers that you're going to watch people who are intelligent people with legitimate degrees who have evidence that is worthy of consideration? With those things in mind, let's begin. As a quick note, we'll mention that the speaker, Lee Strobel, presents this from a Christian perspective. However, the material that you're going to see can be applied to any religion who believes in a creator.
I've always been a logical and curious kind of person. I mean, that's just my personality. I remember when I was little, my parents gave me an electric train for Christmas. And then a couple hours later, my dad finds me in the garage, and I'm throwing the locomotive against the cement floor, trying to break it open. He said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm just trying to figure out how it works." I mean, my parents, because of all the why questions I would ask, finally went out and said, "Here," and they bought me an encyclopedia and said, "Look, the answers are in there. Go look for them. Go find them yourself." I mean, that's just the way I was. And so I guess it's natural that I would become a journalist, because journalists are looking for facts, they're looking for evidence, they're looking for data, they're looking for something that they can publish in the paper and have confidence it is true.
Lee Strobel earned a Master of Studies in Law degree from Yale Law School and is the former legal editor of the Chicago Tribune. He is the best-selling author of several books that explore the evidence for the Christian faith.
I guess given my curiosity, it's not surprising that when I was in high school, science was my favorite topic, because there the teachers actually encouraged me to cut open frogs and find out how things work, which I thought was great. When I was a teenager, I had this deep trust in science, and I think part of it was prompted by the fact that I grew up in post-Sputnik America, where Eisenhower encouraged all young people to delve into science so we could catch up with the Russians. So to me, science sort of represented the empirical, the hard facts, the things that could be proven experimentally, and that was sort of the way in which I looked at life. I thought people who had faith, people who believed in supernatural things like God, I saw that as a sign of weakness, because, do you have any data to back that up?
In the autumn of 1966, Strobel's interest in science led to a life-changing decision.
I can take you back to the exact spot where I was sitting. It was in the 3rd floor, overlooking the asphalt parking lot. I was in the 2nd row, the 3rd chair from the front, when my biology teacher recounted in great detail this experiment that had been conducted in the early 1950s at the University of Chicago.
This experiment that impressed Strobel so deeply was one of the most famous in the history of science. In 1953, Stanley Miller, a graduate chemistry student, tried to demonstrate how life first emerged on Earth. Miller attempted to reproduce the Earth's early atmosphere. He pumped hydrogen, methane, ammonia, and a small amount of water vapor into a maze of glassware. Then sparked the gases with electrical discharges to simulate lightning. After 5 days, he discovered what he had hoped for: a few simple amino acids, the basic building blocks of living organisms, had collected in the dark residue at the bottom of the glass. Many hailed Miller's experiment as proof that essential components of life could have formed in the oceans of the Earth billions of years ago.
The philosophical implications of Miller's experiment were instantly obvious to me. And for me, it was a eureka moment, because I heard this and I thought, wait a minute. If you can show scientifically that life can emerge without any outside assistance, if life can emerge just from naturalistic circumstances, then God was out of a job. From there, the acceptance of Darwinian evolution, and full-blown atheism for that matter, was pretty easy. Because if living organisms could emerge by themselves out of this primordial soup without the assistance of any kind of a god or supernatural intervention, then they certainly could develop naturally over the eons into more and more complex creatures, just as Charles Darwin theorized in his book On the Origin of Species.
As Strobel embraced Darwinism and its atheistic implications, he was surprised to discover that many Christians believed their faith was compatible with Darwinian evolution.
There's no way you can harmonize neo-Darwinism with Christianity. I could never understand Christians who would say, well, you know, I believe in God, and yet I believe in evolution as well. You see, Darwin's ideas about the development of life led to his theory that modern science now generally defines as an undirected process, completely devoid of any purpose or plan. Now, how could God direct an undirected process? How could God have purpose and a plan behind a system that has no plan and no purpose? It just does not make sense. Didn't make sense to me in 1966, and it doesn't make sense to me now.
In 1972, Lee Strobel married Leslie Herdler. 5 years later, Leslie, an agnostic, became a Christian.
And I thought, this is divorce. This is going to be the end of our marriage. But all the negative things I expected to happen in her as a result of her newfound faith, they didn't happen. And instead, I saw positive changes in her values and her character and the way she related to me and the children. And I thought, wait a minute. She is attributing this to God. And I don't believe God exists. And so that was the main thing that prompted me to say, maybe I need to really investigate this and get to the bottom of this and determine, is there really any rational way I could ever believe that this kind of a God really exists and really causes this kind of transformation in a human being? And so I decided to use my legal training and journalism training, my scientific curiosity, to systematically investigate, is there any credibility to the Christian faith?
Because science had played such an instrumental role in his turn to atheism, Strobel embarked on an investigation of major discoveries in biology, chemistry, cosmology, and physics. His studies spanned more than 20 years and included interviews with scientists and scholars as he sought to determine for himself what these discoveries implied about the reality of a creator. Throughout his inquiry, one question remained constant. Does the evidence uncovered by contemporary science point us toward or away from the existence of God?
Two-time Nobel Prize winner Linus Pauling once said that science should be the search for truth. And that's what I wanted to do. I didn't know where the evidence was ultimately going to take me, but I really did want to know the truth about God. And what I found shocked me, and it stunned me.
Sorry for the abrupt cutoff, but we're out of time. We'll continue in our next segment. That was Religion and Science, Part 1. In the second of our two-part discussion, we'll look at more segments of the documentary The Case for a Creator with Lee Strobel. We'll see you then.